Ruth, would you like to ask? You wanted to ask a question. Assuming Ruth's still here.
Yes, you're on mute, Ruth.
Sorry, yes, yes. I was also asking how much it cost, not just the actual capital sum or whatever revenue sum, but how much officer cost, additional cost there was. And then I'd like to understand a bit how you decided which experts to include and how you decided what materials to prepare to brief the Assembly members.
Okay, so in terms of officer time, at Adur and Worthing Councils, we have 3 days volunteering time that's given to every member of staff. And so we were quite lucky that we had, so for example, myself and Chloe, we were able to take our volunteering days and then take the time back at another point in time. So we just kind of shifted that to be able to support the Assembly. And I would say that varying for the 4 months time, I would spend half my time to maybe just a day a week trying to make sure everything was set up. And we had, as part of the capitals, some Democratic Society officer time who that was part of what we paid for them to be able to shape and create all the resources and make sure that everything was set and sorted that end. And in terms of who chose the experts, we had, as part of an assembly process, you would have a board who would decide, and that's a board of people outside of the council to make sure that the process is impartial and isn't driven by any agenda from a council perspective. So it's a normal part of an assembly process that you would have an advisory group. And that advisory group was had a wide range of people, someone from Sussex Wildlife Trust. We had a professor who's a planning professor from the University of Sussex, a member of XR, Shoreham, a wide range of people. I'm not doing justice. You can see them on the website exactly who it was. They were the people who put forward their recommendations. And from there, we sent emails to the people that they thought would be appropriate to talk to the topic, the question that we were asking. What we didn't expect was a tidal wave of people who were supportive of it. So Democratic Society said that generally speaking, you'd send out maybe 20 invites and you would get back maybe 4 people who were willing to speak. So given that it was online, I think we sent out about 30 requests for speakers and 25 people came back. So it was overwhelming, the amount of people who wanted to contribute, including Baroness Brown, who is one of the leading figures in the Committee on Climate Change, who recorded a video for us. So some really eminent figures in the climate world who were generous with their time and in allowing us to really understand the different aspects and different topics. And I would say as well, the experts by lived experience were as important as the experts, kind of the topical experts, because it really helped us to understand what is it like for a young person, what is it like for somebody who has a disability who may not be able to take public transport, what might we need to bear in mind there. So that's the question. I think there was a second part, Ruth.
Well, how they decided what materials they were going to choose to present and what sort of guidelines there were for that.
Yes, there were guidelines they were given. They were given the topic. They were given a very short amount of time because we were kind of balancing not wanting to overwhelm with hours and hours worth of content. So most people had 5 or 10 minutes to record the important things from their perspective of what they need, what Assembly members would need to know to be able to respond to the question at hand.
Thanks very much.
Can I ask, if a council wanted to actually run a climate assembly, rather than reinvent the wheel, I know you've got lots of video resources because I recorded one of them, would it be possible for another council, especially within West Sussex, to actually use those resources? And my second question is, you were forced to use virtual, to run a virtual climate assembly, but you said that there are there were advantages, it turned out. So if another council was to run a climate assembly, would you recommend that all of it or certain aspects of the climate assembly were run online?
I would be keen to hear from Mary about what for you were the benefits.
I think the benefits were the amount of information and the videos and things that you could access, so having access to online was certainly useful. And from an equal opportunities point of view, it enables people who couldn't get to a venue for mental health reasons or physical health reasons could take part more easily in the assembly. From a personal point of view, and I don't know how many of the other assembly members felt this way, I enjoy the face-to-face interactions, and I feel that I would have made better connections in a face-to-face. So personally, I think a combination, or the ability for those who couldn't attend in person to access the same thing online would be a good fit. But I mean, I'm obviously only speaking from my own experience there.
I think as well, on a in-person assembly, some of the time would be spent listening to speakers, then crafting the questions and asking them the questions you have from the talks, whereas those videos were watched outside, the questions were considered and thought up, and then the days that we spent together were active learning days. So there was a lot less of hearing, absorbing information. It was more active the days that we had. Liz, your hand was up. I don't know if you had a question.
Yeah, I've got so many questions, but I'll try and limit them. I'm trying to get Aaron to also have a climate assembly, try and get them interested. Questions were, if you did it online, did you have breakout rooms with facilitators? Fantastic. See, that's really
and it was
well.
It was important. So each breakout room would have both a facilitator and a note taker, just to make sure that, because it's hard to do both note taking and facilitating a conversation together. So it was intensive, but I think definitely those small groups were essential.
Yeah, and another question was, is it true that a lot of this was done through crowdfunding?
No, it was a commitment by the council, and so it was council expenditure.
Okay. Right.
Brilliant. Can I come back and then hand over to Councillor Jonathan Brown? But one of my questions didn't get answered. Sneaky. If another council, especially one in West Sussex, was to run a climate assembly, could they use all those wonderful videos that Worthing and Adur have got?
Of course, please do, please do. I would only say that it was really helpful that the day 3 were for the most part Adur and Worthing people. So it was really, it wasn't a what should West Sussex do, it was what should Adur and Worthing do. And so those conversations, I think it was really important to have Adur and Worthing people speaking at that. So yes, of course, use the resources.
Thank you. Councillor Jonathan Brown, I think you had a question. I don't think you've asked.
Thank you. Yes. How did you make the most of the opportunity to raise public awareness, not just of the process of the climate assembly, but also what else society and individuals will need to do, and the council will need to do? And related to that, were the members offered anonymity, and/or did you find it very useful to use the members of the assembly as spokespeople for this process of publicising the action? Thanks.
I'll pass to Chloe for the using members to the role they can take in publicising. In terms of anonymity, yes, we at each event, I think people put a little asterisk at their name if they didn't want to be recorded. and made sure that the photos that you saw in the presentation were only people who gave their consent to have their face seen, their name seen. So I think that's an essential part of an assembly process, which is harder to do online, because if you're just doing it in a closed room, then nobody need to see in, and you can be a lot more closed. But we made sure that anything that was publicised or shared in terms of questions that people asked were those who gave their consent to have their face seen, and we only used first names when we were referring to people.
During the Climate Assembly, we also did an online survey which went out to residents so they could have their say, because that's definitely one thing that we've had lots of people say, oh, I wish I was there. Like, lots of people wanted to be involved, and it was a really great thing to be involved in. And at the end of the process, we the Assembly members were surveyed themselves to say, how much do you want to be involved? Do you want to be involved in media inquiries and press work, that type of thing? So we've got a list of who might want to do what. That's still an ongoing thing, but there's been press activity and some kind of TV report, the BBC South East, and radio and some podcasts. But Mary has presented to the our joint strategic committee, and she did such a fabulous job. That's why I thought I'd bring her along today again. But other people have done other things and ongoing. They've also been interviewed. Well, we've got an online magazine called Sustainable AW that we featured the Climate Assembly in the last 2 issues, and again we're going to feature their stories. And that's what we really want to do now, is to work with the Assembly members to really pull out their story and their journey from the start of the Climate Assembly to where they are now, where they're going, how they're going to share that with their own kind of micro community. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up question? You mentioned that you had a lot of residents fill in a survey and they wanted to take part. Did you consciously try to make the most of hundreds or thousands of residents who were interested and say, not just tell us what you think, but take the message of this assembly out to your communities? Did you try to use them as spokespeople for change? And if so, how did you manage that?
I'm just trying to remember what the question. I think the questions were about what actions they might be willing to take. So we could have it was a gauge really of what type of things people wanted to do. But that really, it feels like now we're trying to kind of talk with our communications team about, is there a call to action here? Like, every time we're talking about the Climate Assembly and the recommendations, are we going to have some kind of call to action, encouraging people to join a voluntary group, put up posters, do whatever it might be, and there'll be a list of things. And that's what I'm really excited about on Tuesday, having this meeting with the Climate Assembly members to feel like, what are their ideas? How do they think that we should be sharing this with the community? Because I might come up with a whole different list of things sitting in the council, even though I am a resident in Shoreham, but they might have some really great ideas and say, oh, we've got to go to that group there and talk to them about it. So it really has to be kind of co-designed and led by them, really.
Can I invite Tom from Chichester, a steering committee member and environmental lead in Chichester? Do you want to ask your question?
This is hopefully it's quite a simple one, but have you published a timeline and project plan of the whole process?
That I think is in the we've got a full report which details what happened and what are the outputs. It's a considerable size document, and all the information about that is there. We haven't published kind of the step-by-step plans for each assembly day, what happened and when. We don't have those in there, but you can see a timeline of what happened. All that information is within the final report, which is on our web page for the Climate Assembly.
It's pretty detailed. I call it the mega beast. It's like 155 pages long, but there is an executive summary which is a little bit more easy to digest.
Wonderful. Can I ask Pat Smith, who's a Seeker Steering Group member and environmental lead, activism lead in Dorking, would you like to ask your question? Pat, are you there? Or is she falling asleep? No?
Oh, I'm wide awake.
Come on then.
Yeah, I'm really wide awake. It's just in case I inadvertently picked my nose or something. So yeah, the question is quite straightforward, which is how binding are the Assembly findings on the Council? I mean, if, for example, the Assembly said something that the Council felt wasn't going to be acceptable, how would they go about negotiating with the Assembly? Because there must be things that the Assembly's come up with that the Council didn't want to implement. So how do you cope with that?
So they, the recommendations were taken to our joint strategic committee and were all supported. It was supported fully by Assembly members. There will be some things. So the planning one, for example, is a big one. It's one that's outside of our direct control, because there are planning regulations that that are in statute that we don't have the ability to influence, and if a plan isn't approved, there's a recourse to a higher body to be able to potentially say, we disagree with you, this planning needs to be given. So I think in principle all of them are supported. How that comes about, so with that particular one, it's how do we use our influence, what can we do around it to know that our vision for the future is that planning fully takes on environmental sustainability as a priority, but within the current context, what can we actively do now, and what's our role to influence, to lobby, to see what we can do. So I think that there was, it was really heartening that all the recommendations were fully approved and to be taken forward. And it's how that happens that we'll be working on. And so there are some things that we can actively plough on with now, and Chloe's detailed them, but there are other ones that we may need to take different tacks to try and make steps forward.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Francesca, you haven't had a go yet, then Brian can pop it back in again.
Well, I was actually, thank you, Carrie. So my name is Francesca Iliff. I'm the Strategic Sustainability Manager at Adur and Worthing Councils. And Chloe and Amy have been doing a great job answering the questions, but I just wanted to answer that one from Pat a little bit as well. Just a little additional comment from me. You said, supposing, the recommendations, the council doesn't agree with the recommendations, and I just wanted to make the point that actually the councils, both Adur District and Worthing Borough Council, have both adopted the net zero target for their areas by 2045 under UK 100 cities pledge. And that in order to achieve that, we need to do this and more and more and more, So in a way, the recommendations for the climate from Climate Assembly members give us focus about where, locally the priorities need to be, but also there will be additional work that needs to be done. And also the other thing is that these recommendations are not just for the council. They are for, some of them will be more sort of council focused and owned, but actually it's about collaboration and us all working together on these. And that's a really important point. The council couldn't possibly do everything to, turn the climate juggernaut around. We all need to do our bit, but it's about the council facilitating, leading, working with others to help them also do their bit. So yeah, so the recommendations have been really wonderful for that, in giving us a steer about where local people want us to focus, but there's a lot more work that still needs to be done.
Thank you, Francesca. There are other people that want to ask questions, but Pat, does yours relate to what Francesca's saying?
Yeah, if it's possible, just a very quick one. Francesca, you mentioned about planning and how important that was and how difficult it is. Can you give any sort of feedback on ways in which people can interact with councils outside the climate assemblies to get them to stick to be much more climate aware in their planning, the way they receive planning applications?
I think the recommendation around planning was very carefully crafted because we are restricted by the National Planning Policy Framework. However, within that, I think there is lots of scope for planning authorities to push really hard to develop policies that are aspirational, and then make sure that planning officers work really hard with developers to make to really draw the best out of every single development. You know, whenever they have when a developer wants to put in a planning application and they have a meeting with officers need to be saying, we have high aspirations, we've got strong aspirations, our councillors will be looking for sustainability as your scheme goes through the planning system. And then also putting a real spotlight on good quality developments that are delivering well on sustainability. So by putting a spotlight and encouraging others and showing others that it's actually viable to do that. So there's lots of planning authorities can do, but on the other hand, for residents, the planning system isn't necessarily very easy to engage with, but residents have a really, really powerful opportunity to influence the plan by getting involved in consultations as and when they happen. And that's a power that many local residents don't really pick up. And so also commenting on planning applications that you don't want to see and saying why. So the planning system is supposed to be a very democratic process, and the more that people can engage with it, the better.
Thank you, Francesca. Sally, you have a question. I know you have Brian, but Sally hasn't spoken yet, so. Oh, Sally needs to take, oh, what's happened? You're on mute. Oh, she doesn't want to ask a question. Okay, Melanie, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, I think it probably follows on quite nicely from the last answer. I think I'm correct, but if I'm not, somebody please tell me, and I won't carry on with the question. I think I'm correct in that some of the inland councils, such as Horsham District, have to take some of the housing allocation for councils on the south coast that don't have sufficient space. Is that correct?
Certainly they do for Crawley, but
I thought Horsham did as well. And so I wondered, because housing, obviously new housing development can have a big impact on biodiversity, whether those councils on the south coast, obviously Ada and Worthing in this instance, feel there's a need to support their inland council colleagues in mitigating the effect of that housing, and how could you do that?
Yes, they do. Horsham have a duty to cooperate with both Crawley and with the south coast, including Worthing.
Thank you. I don't know all the technical terminology, so thank you. So given that is the case, does Ada and Worthing feel they have a duty of care to help support the biodiversity in, say, Horsham, when housing is threatening some of that?
Francesca, are you putting your hand up to discuss this, or?
Yeah, others may be able to answer it better than I can, because I'm not privy to the conversations between the two planning authorities. But I suppose this is where the planning system comes into play, and the importance of planning officers in any local planning authority, making sure that they fully implement their own adopted plan. because it's those officers there that would be making sure that the impact of any development is locally mitigated. So yeah, that's all I can say. We can take that question away, but I think that's the best that we could probably do with it today, I'm afraid, Melanie.
Does anyone on that subject, does anyone else with Horsham knowledge or want to speak? Any of the other councillors? Ruth, do you want to?
Well, I'd say that was a really interesting question. And it's not just to do with biodiversity, it's actually to do with the spatial planning. So within Horsham, there's obviously quite a lot of pressure for the housing to be placed in sustainable locations, which can be read by some as meaning adjacent to existing large settlements, which are generally in the north. But where there's a duty to cooperate for the southern coastal strip, then in terms of the amount of journeys that are generated, there's an argument that it's more sustainable to be located closer to the southern coastal strip. So yes, I think there's a really interesting question there as to how Horsham meets any duty to cooperate for the southern strip, and where those houses end up being put, and whether Ada and Worthing are going to have a say in that process, or whether they just turn around and say, well, actually, we're quite glad not to have to bother about this, it's Horsham's problem.
Thank you. I didn't necessarily expect an answer, but I did raise it as an interesting question. And I think it was partly prompted because everybody at the end of the presentation, the presentations, which I thought were fantastic, everybody was saying, oh, I wished we lived in Worthing. But I thought, well, we don't. And I thought we did probably take some of the housing allocation from Worthing. So that impacts on us. So I'm just pleased to have been able to raise it, and hope people can take that away as something to look into in the future.
Mike, do you want to? Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. It's really just to go back to the planning system and to encourage people to get involved with it, because it is public. It can be done. You can set up searches there. But I think my sort of top tip would be to, if you're going to object to something, use the local plan, if there is one, or NPPF, and couch it in those terms rather than just emotive phrases, shall we say. It makes it much easier for the officers to kind of relate to it, I think, and it makes it it helps councillors who might have similar views to pick up as well.
I just add something. I'm not expecting an answer, but I think it's something that concerned me, actually. We're actually applying for planning permission to convert a barn. It's not an attractive barn, it's a barn out the back here, into an eco. Of course, it would be an eco barn. And then we'll sell our house and move into the eco barn that's got beautiful views. And the planning consultant, on discussing it with him, we were talking about the eco credentials that we would be installing within this barn, and making it as eco as possible. And he said to me, well, actually, the planning department will not be interested in that at all. Totally irrelevant, Carrie. Ignore that. Please don't muddy the waters and say anything about your plans for environmental credentials of the building. And I was really disappointed in that. But interestingly, in the planning process, it did get rejected, although we're going higher. The Billingshurst Parish Council said that they would be interested in seeing its sustainability credentials. So, so I thought that was really interesting. So, but what I'm saying is that it's not clear cut, is it? There are some of us that with an individual property really want to go to town on it, but actually the planning department are not going to be interested. I don't know, Les, I just thought I'd drop there, and it wasn't really a question. Les.
Yeah, thank you. I live in Brighton, and I wish I lived in Worthing sometimes. This is a question for Chloe, I think. Chloe, you mentioned about publishing annually the carbon data, and one of the things I've been involved in helping to take the Climate Assembly forward in Brighton, and one of the things that I'm trying to think through at the moment is if we're to engage more people, then something that sets out the target, which is net zero by 2030 or 2040 or 2045, and something that shows progress towards that, and something that conveys, you know, a sense of urgency, and a bit like Francesca was saying about you need to do all these things plus a bunch more. And I just wondered if you, or possibly with your Climate Assembly members, you know, whether you've done any thinking about sort of accessible metrics that could be published to show people we're making progress here, and we need to make progress faster, but something that could draw people in so that they all feel like they're contributing to an overall target. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Because we're just meeting the Climate Assembly members next week, we haven't started picking into that, like digging deeper into how we're going to do that. And I think it's tricky, isn't it? Because there'll probably be some people that will really resonate with, and seeing like the target of where you've got to get to and the actions that you might be able to take will kind of spur people on to take actions. But for others, that might not be the right thing. And that's what the engagement with the Assembly members will be about next week, I think, is how we actually going to convince everyone take action. I don't know if Francesca, if you wanted to say anything else about the carbon audit.
Yeah, so this was one of the Climate Assembly recommendations is around this, but our thinking is kind of, you know, in a way it's really crucial that everyone really does understand what it would mean in reality to go for net zero for all of us, because obviously that's what needs to happen. And as Chloe said, you know, some people that are maybe less technically minded won't want to know that level of detail, but a lot of people are very keen to really take their responsibility seriously. So where we're at is we're likely to set up some kind of a net zero forum for organisations across Ada and Worthing, to bring people together that have made a commitment and are working towards that, in order to develop momentum and help others understand what it will mean, and encourage others to develop their own commitments. And likewise for residents, there's a lot of sort of carbon footprint tools around that we can be promoting, and that's going to be part of our engagement and the comms that we're going to be doing in coming weeks, months, years.
Thank you. Claire, did you have a question? I know earlier on, whether it's still relevant, earlier on you asked a question in the chat. Does anyone else, have you got a hand up? Lynn, do you want to ask a question? You have your hand up.
Yes, it's going back to what Francesca was just saying. Earlier when Francesca mentioned the time frame, she said 2045 for the net zero. Is this net zero forum, and was the Assembly working to a date of 2045? Because if it was, it's too late. That's shocking to me.
I don't know if Amy wants to take that. I'm happy to try and answer. No, we didn't have a hard target in the discussion sort of title, as it were, partly because of this issue of, you know, as we go forward, the more that we learn from the scientists, about carbon budgets, for example, we know that the target has to be brought as close to us as possible, and that we need to do more action up front to really stay within 1.5 degrees. So we didn't include a target because there is just so much disagreement about what is the right target. We just need to take action. So we didn't actually include a target as such, but lots of our speakers spoke about it, and it was discussed throughout the assembly.
And do you think it's better then to avoid talking about a target just to get any action done?
I don't think so. I think it's crucial to have a target. I mean, we're aiming for net zero, whether that's 2030, 2040, 2040, 2045. We need to be aiming for that. So that is our hard target. The council itself has a target of net zero by 2030, and we're pulling out all the stops to try and achieve that. But it's incredibly challenging. But we all need to be working towards net zero.
Thanks, Francesca. Bob, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. Great presentation and super discussion. My question is to the council officers, really, that you obviously enjoy the support of the majority of the council, or maybe you don't. And do you have a climate change sustainability champion who is able to pull everybody together and get them going in the same direction? Because a lot of the councils that I think people are outside of Worthing and Ada, a lot of the general public are having big problems in trying to engage with the councils and just even establish a channel of communication. So how did you galvanize the council? Because obviously even just trying to get them to do a virtual climate change, I mean, Chichester, for instance, is talking about the end of 2021. They might not report till 2022. They won't take any action until 2023. And that's appalling. And that's got to change. So are there any tricks to getting councillors to talk to one another and support you, by the way?
So that's a big question. Amy, do you want to say anything? I can't actually see Amy at the moment.
No, I was just having a thinking head of so I'll leave it to you, Francesca, if you're happy to talk a bit about it.
I'll have a shot at it.
If it's too political, then don't answer. Yeah.
No, we've got, I mean, every council has a sort of an environmental lead within their cabinet, but I'd say there's really strong support across the council, across the councillors and cross-party for this agenda. When we go to committee, it's clear that the councillors are really behind these projects, are really happy to see the success that's happening, are really proud of the success. I mean, we've got slightly different situations in Ada from Worthing in the sort of portfolios. So we actually have a sustainability portfolio in Worthing, but an environmental portfolio in both Ada and Worthing. So the leader of the council is actually in Worthing, is the sustainability lead, and he's spoken at our climate conference, for example. But I'd say that equally Ada councillors could have come along and held that position. I mean, we just get cross-party support now, but I think that it is a journey, and I think there's a high level of trust and confidence between councillors and the sustainability team and agenda, and also higher up the council, the chief exec, the directors. There, you know, this isn't, it takes everyone working together, and it's a collaboration across all sort of areas of the council. But yeah, we do have great councillor support for this agenda.
I also want to jump in and say that Francesca has worked tirelessly on sustainability since she's been in post, and has, I think that definitely what she said is true in terms of it being a priority. But I think there's also the energy that she has put into the work, and the trust that's been built up through things that have happened and progress that's been made, and that also has been part of that journey of seeing what is possible. And so I think it would be unfair to not mention that, because it's a labour of love, but it is a labour, I'm sure.
And how important was it? You've labelled it sustainability group or sustainability as opposed to climate change. So do you think that's the language there is obviously very carefully chosen to promote across a number of disciplines, because it's not just about climate change, presumably?
I could quite easily sing a climate change portfolio. You know, it's really for members to decide that. But I don't see it as beyond the realms of possibility.
Thank you.
Lucia, is it Lucia? Have you got a question? You seem to have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, thanks. This has been so interesting and helpful. I'm also based in Chichester. I'm really interested to know more about the advisory group and how you selected the membership of that and what their role is, how they support the process.
So they were selected at the start of the process. I'm trying to bring them up, and it was thinking about what is likely to be. So the council chose the trying to share, think about who was on the group, and that group is now closed. So they were overseeing the process of the Climate Assembly in full, guiding expert speakers, looking at the questions that were going to be asked as part of the survey, and to experts by lived experience. So there were people who are active in the area and have knowledge, so knowledgeable people on the topics of climate change. So we sent out a number of invitations. The first meeting we had, I think about 15 people who joined us for that meeting, and people who are on the advisory group can't speak at as part of the Climate Assembly, so that we can ensure that their bias doesn't impact the process as well. So we realised quickly that there were some key people in the who were at an initial meeting that actually needed to shift to be part of the experts who were speaking at the event. So you can see on the Climate Assembly webpage all of the minutes from the meetings. They met in total 5 times throughout the process, really guiding it. But initially, going back to your question, they were people who are in our local area, knowledgeable about the topics of climate change from a variety of disciplines, to be able to ensure a breadth of experience that could be presented to Assembly members, and also people that had linkages to be able to bring in expert speakers. That's how they were selected.
Great, thanks. So just to sort of follow, in some way, I mean, it's about ensuring impartiality and independence and breadth and so on, but it's also adds capacity to the council officers to some extent, because you've got people there who can help you think through things, identify. Is that how it works?
Yes, so so we would take to them an item for discussion, which might be about the upcoming Climate Assembly weekend and our plans, So our plans, Democratic Society's plans as being the impartial body who was leading this event, and then the Assembly advisory group members could talk through it, could give suggestions, could ask questions about it, could make recommendations about shaping and shifting it up. So in some, it was helpful in terms of their thinking through the process. I would say the majority of their work was in shaping the question, in shaping the kind of wider kind of these are the plans, these are the types of speakers, them helping us shape the types of speakers who we would invite. So their work was, the lion's share was at the start, and then kind of became lessened just through things being in motion and that voice not being needed as much. But if you're holding an assembly process, then an advisory group is kind of a standard part to ensure impartiality and would be something that would always happen.
Thanks, Amy. I think probably it is 3:30, and I'm really aware that Francesca and Amy and Chloe and many of you have taken a big chunk of your weekend. I was going to do a survey, actually, a little poll, but I accidentally did it in the other meeting. So totally ignore that. But I'd really like to know if you could put your hands down, those that got your hands up, put your hands down. I'd be quite interested to know actually how many councillors we actually have. So please, could you put your emoji hand up? Just out of interest, so you'll all shift, I think, onto my first screen so I can see how many councillors out of, I'm not sure how many, we certainly sent invitations to many, and that's really disappointing. Well, no, Francesca's got her hand up, she's not one. So I think there's more. Look, oh, Sarah, yeah, and we've also got Fiona from Thacum. You haven't got your hand up, maybe she's disappeared. So so that's 4, 5, and Fiona, 6 councillors. Oh, I tried my best.
Is Councillor Tracy Bangett still here? She was here earlier.
Okay, maybe that's 6. Maybe I got 6 out of I don't know how many hundreds.
It's not bad going, actually.
Isn't it? Oh, right, okay.
Tracy Bangett and Eileen Lintle, both from Chichester, were here for a lot of the meeting. I don't know if they are now.
So what does that make it? Does that make it 8? Someone in the notes actually did say, you know, this is really, really good, which it is. And, you know, how could there be any sort of follow-up? Our meetings are all about learning, but they're also about taking action. So we have exceeded, we have gone over an hour and a half, but
no, it's a seminar.
This has been really, really good, but I'm not really sure. I don't know that I can ask Worthing and Adur to return again. Maybe we can debate offline, you know, how we could take further action and take this forwards. But so before I just finally thank you.